players gather to cast powerful spells, some of the oldest and most powerful in the history of Magic the Gathering. Dark Ritual, Force of Will, Lightning Bolt, and many, many others. Battling head-to-head in brutal combat, they all have one thing in common: to uphold their legacy in the search for eternal glory.
The Eternal Glory podcast is brought to you by the minds behind BoshNRoll on YouTube, ThrabenU University, and theepicstorm.com.
And welcome to episode 44 of the Eternal Glory podcast, Delver Doesn't Die. I'm Phil Gallagher, joined by Bryant Cook and Brian Coval. How are you all doing tonight?
I wish it would fucking die, Phil.
Yeah, we had a long conversation when we were trying to name this episode of how do we make like a nuclear bomb reference where like only cockroaches will survive the nuclear holocaust, and Delver is that cockroach. The insectile aberration is the race that will replace humanity when everything else is gone.
So how are you guys doing outside of Delver of Secrets?
Whoa. You're making a lot of assumptions there, fella. I'm having a grand old time. I like Delver of Secrets when it's not horseshit good. I like when it's just regular good. But we can get to that later.
Yeah. D&T, good Delver matchup. Okay place. Delver has a special place in my heart as a deck that I bully and enjoy, beating up on.
I was just trying to segue. You guys made it seem like I have this big issue with Delver. Like I'm in the wrong here.
Do
you have
need
an
to go?
Agenda all the time. You want Force of Negation banned in Legacy. I don't trust anything you say.
All right, random Redditor.
All right, I'll start off. I'm doing okay. I'm back to in-person teaching, which is weird and full of all sorts of tiny issues, but I'm getting along fine.
They're called students, Phil?
Yeah, little issues. That's what I said. I've been playing a lot of video games in my after-school hours. I've been trying to find games that both my girlfriend and I can play together. So we went through Cuphead over about the last 2 weeks, which is really fun. Probably one of the best games that I've played for the Switch. If you're into like side scrollers with some shoot 'em up elements, highly recommend it. And then we picked up Diablo 3 yesterday, which is a game that I've played before, but I figured it was something fun that we could play on the couch together.
Is Cuphead as difficult as it sounds? I think it come out with like an outrageous number of like settings or hidden modes that are just genuinely challenging.
The game's hard, but it does things to help you out with that. There is a lower difficulty you can set it to if you're having trouble, but the game's really rewarding, and the difficulty isn't tedious. So if you compare it to something like Dark Souls, when you're trying to learn a boss, you also have to run through, 5 minutes of level in order to get back to that boss, and that's bullshit. Whereas this game is just like, the level is the boss fight. Throw your head against it until you're ready. And then there's separate, like, side-scrolling levels.
I watched a live speed run at one of the GDQs over the past few years in the pre-COVID times, where the Mexican runner, that's his name, by the way, I'm not just saying the runner who is Mexican, the Mexican runner, he's a speed runner, he did Cuphead, and he did the alternate mode where you don't kill or damage any enemies except bosses. Like, he just avoided every enemy, and there's like a secret, like, don't you get a grade at the end of the level, like A, B, C, or whatever?
Uh-huh.
There's like a secret, it's like Q or S or something that you get if you clear the level without damaging any enemies. And he did the whole game that way, and it was amazing.
Man, that's insane. I might have to go back and try that. But
yeah, look that up.
I'm also thinking about socializing with humans again, which is weird and somewhere I didn't expect to be. Like, CDC is all like, hey, groups of small hangouts with all vaccinated people is probably okay. And so I'm toying around with the idea of getting together with a couple of my teacher friends that I'm mentoring. And that's cool. I didn't expect to be doing that as of a month ago.
Yeah, it's a brave new world. I am also fully vaccinated, and my girlfriend's getting her second round in a day or two at the time of this recording, and she's already talking about, like, wait, we can go out to restaurants on date nights again. And, like, that still doesn't stop us from carrying to other people, but, like, we don't hang out with other people. So, I don't know. I'm waffling the ethics of that. We have a wedding this Saturday, and then there's another one coming up in May, and I didn't miss weddings. Wow, I hate weddings. And now I have no excuse not to go.
I actually really like weddings. Get drunk, get to dance. It's a lot of fun.
I give a
You can
mean
do
best
that-
man speech.
Listen, you can get drunk and dance anywhere. You don't have to, like, put on stupid clothes and go out of town and rent a hotel and buy a gift for people you don't really like. Like, I don't know. I hate weddings. I actually hate the entire institution of marriage. So this is a deeper thing. And just the fact that somebody would spend what they could spend on the down payment on a house on a party just makes me fucking sick. So I don't like weddings in general.
Well, we sort of eloped, so we didn't do that. But going to other people's expensive parties is a lot of fun.
I think I've had one at one wedding lifetime. It was a wedding of two of my dearest friends, and it was an age-appropriate wedding. Like, it wasn't like a family wedding. So maybe just like a peer wedding is more interesting. Like, your parents aren't lurking somewhere around and like pressuring you to dance with your like weird ugly cousin or whatever. Like, I don't know about you guys, but that's mostly my wedding experience.
Pittsburgh's weird.
I am not from Pittsburgh. I've never been to a Pittsburgh wedding.
All right, Brian. So you're on the ethical fence, thinking about getting out, doing some things. What have you been up to, though?
Well, I am coming off a work-related injury, which it's been a while. Like, normally that's part of my job that I'm good for like 2 a year. That just like put me down for a week, but I sprained my thumb pretty good. A piece of furniture was thrown at me last week, and I blocked it with my thumb. So I am coming off of light duty. I actually got cleared today, and I'll be back at work tomorrow. So that's nice that I have use of my hands back, and I put them to work immediately. I assembled the disc golf net that I mentioned back in our Christmas episode. I got a disc golf net for the house for Christmas. I assembled it. It's wonderful. I've been practicing in the backyard, and the weather is finally nice enough that I can go to the park and actually play around, and I shot slightly better than I did in the fall before the winter came, so I did not get rusty, and I'm surprised by that. But just wait, my next round will be horrendous when the beginner's luck wears off.
Yeah, I often found a little bit of break from frisbee golf was good for me. Because, like, you kind of get in your own head, you're thinking too much about what you've done in the past, and then you, like, get out there, reevaluate things, and you play better.
Yeah.
But now I haven't played in 2.5 years. There's going to be real rust the next time I go out.
Oh, yeah, you're going to have to sand that rust down for sure. But that's both, like, the beauty and pain of games like golf and, naturally, frisbee golf off of it. Like, anything that you've done before, you can do, and it's just a matter of putting your brain in the right place to do all of the right things in the same round. It's like, I've birdied this hole 17 times in my life, and the time that I par the hole before it for the first time, I bogey the one that I birdied before. What is wrong with me? This is infuriating. But at the same time, you're going to come back, because you just parred that hole for the first time, and you can birdie the next one, and you can do each thing. You just got to string it together. And my dad is an avid, like, actual golfer, and there's a book about golf called A Good Walk Spoiled, which I just think is a hilarious title. I don't know anything about the book, but just the implication that playing golf ruins a nice walk is just so perfect.
So have you gotten your ace yet?
I have not aced. I had a heroic putt this past outing. Like, it was definitely... It could have been considered a mid-range shot, but I have not actually just dunked it yet.
I can count on one hand the number I've gotten, and they feel good.
I bet, yeah. I suspect I would lose my mind, but I'm usually playing alone, and I don't really like interacting with strangers, so there will never be like a real celebration. But I will say, when I sunk that crazy deep putt the other day, I like looked around like, did anyone see that? And of course they didn't, because I'm alone in the woods. But I earned it. The birds saw it. God, whatever God you believe in, saw it.
It's
So
Keranos for me personally.
That's my god, Phil. Literally the god of storms. Come on, get your own. Heliod or something. Get out of here.
Phil can have that one that non-basic lands enter the battlefield tapped. Or non-basic snow lands enter the battlefield tapped.
That's what we're gonna do tonight. We're gonna tilt tonight.
You can have Halvar, God of Battle, also. You can have all of these just not quite playable D&T gods.
All right. So my new polytheistic religion aside, Brian, how are you?
I've been doing pretty good. My birthday was this week. Turned 32, getting old. I'm no longer a prime number. But my parents shipped me a bunch of like knick-knack birthday gifts, and one of them was a Rubik's Cube. I've literally never owned a Rubik's Cube in my life, and it's got a Mets logo on it and other Mets things. I've managed to get one side done, but that's as far as I can get without messing everything up. And somebody messaged me this week. They're like, we find out through this podcast that you end up like, you didn't do a lot of things as a kid. Like I didn't drink hot chocolate, and I didn't, there's something else they said. I don't remember, but I guess like I had a very sheltered childhood, because I'm sure this will get brought up that I never had a Rubik's Cube as well. Yeah. So other than that, this isn't a spoiler, I promise, but I just loved how in WandaVision, it was the perfect COVID comparison that the final episode, Wanda spends the entire time in sweatpants. I just thought that was brilliant. I have to imagine it was intentional, but I just thought it was perfect. I don't know if you guys actually watched it or not, but it was sweet.
Nah, I'm kind of in my Marvel burnout phase, where like I'm sure the stuff that's being made is good, but I've had enough for now. And then later I'll get excited about it and have a couple years worth of media to catch up on.
Yeah, I'm the exact opposite. Like I can intellectually recognize the like death of good American cinema, because now it's so formulaic and Disney owns everything that like we're just going to get these endless blockbusters. But there's a big part of my brain that loves that. So I will consume any superhero media that gets dropped as soon as it's dropped. I think we talked about how bad Wonder Woman 1984 was on the show a couple months ago. Which
Bryant is shaking his head in rage right now.
It is just horrendous, but I would be lying if I told you my eyes didn't well up a little bit when like the superhero music started playing in that opening scene and she started just like cracking her whip around, and I was like, oh my god, I've missed this so desperately during COVID. So
we recently watched the first half of Endgame. Is that the first half? Or Infinity War? And every single time I watch that movie, when Thor comes down using the Bifrost from the new axe, and he's like, bring me Thanos, I get chills. Like I can feel them going up my spine every single time. And I've seen that movie 15, 20 times now.
Oh yeah, there are definitely, they have figured out how to tap into that like raw cathartic. It's not the same like catharsis that you get watching like American History X, obviously, when like the kid has learned that racism is bad, but then gets shot by a gangbanger for a previous mistake he made. Like, oh god, crushing. Like that's good cinema, but like the moments where it's like in Endgame, when like Captain Marvel shows up and she's like, hey Peter Parker, you got something for me? And then like all of like the female superheroes like just line up in a row, and that's like a really powerful moment that I'm like, oh shit. Like people screamed in the theater when that happened, and that's like, they're good at finding those moments. And yeah, the Thor showing up with the axe is bananas like that too. Also,
they planned Avengers Assemble for 10 years and then finally made it this like massive thing that was just really amazing. But enough about Marvel. So I was watching the show with Brendan Fraser in it, and my wife and I, we were like, it's weird because like in my mind, he is still the guy from The Mummy. And seeing him at 65 years old after he's let himself go a little bit, not being in the public eye for a while does that. And this was a few months ago. And then last night The Mummy was a newly added movie to HBO, and we were like, oh, we should watch The Mummy. I haven't seen that movie in 20 years. I forgot how amazing it is.
It's perfect.
It is so good. But also, like, I didn't appreciate this as like a 12-year-old kid, but it's like pretty close to Indiana Jones. Like, if I made Indiana Jones, I would have been a little bit upset. But like, they just took our movie and reskinned it. Like, it's so hokey and campy and perfect, but you can definitely tell it's like heavily influenced by those movies.
So one big thing that's different between The Mummy and Indiana Jones is that Evie, a woman, is the lead. She is the key decision maker. She runs the group. She is in charge in an action movie. And all of the women in Indiana Jones serve some sort of like femme fatale double agent, like sex appeal, but I'm actually trying to kill you, or just damsel in distress kind of role. And that's pretty big for film in general. Like
I'd agree.
That movie was way ahead of its time, and it is perfect. And I'm actually surprised to hear that Brendan Fraser is in something. What show is he in?
So there's a HBO show called Titans, and in season 1, they set up a spin-off of Titans called Doom Patrol, and he plays a robot in Doom Patrol. He's in a couple of the episodes as himself, but most of the time he's a giant robot.
All right, I've seen every episode of Titans. I didn't know that Brendan Fraser was in Doom Patrol because a couple of years ago I read an article about like what happened to Brendan Fraser, and basically he was like they interviewed him at his like Montana ranch where he's just been hiding out of the public eye for the last 20 years, and apparently he just like raises cows and shoots his bow and arrow and just generally chills and doesn't want to do anything. And they asked him why, and he was like, just look at the 90s. I was in like 4 action movies a year. My body was held together with like duct tape, ice packs, and painkillers, and I just had to be in perfect shape. I was doing my own stunts. I was getting run ragged. My managers took advantage of me. They were like, oh, you'll be fine. They'll treat you better on the next one. And then they didn't. And he was just like the perfect action heartthrob for like 10 years. And then he was close to death physically in real life, so he just quit. And I'm surprised to hear that he's back in something. That rules. That'll make me watch it.
All right, should we switch topics to donations?
Go for it.
All right, I guess I'll be the bad guy. We received 0 donations last episode, and we actually received 0 donations after our largest, most listened to episode, the Come On Wizards episode, just a few ago. We paid for SoundCloud hosting to host all of our audio files this week. We're pretty low on podcast funds, so if you appreciate what we do, if you like the content that we produce, please donate at theeternalglorypodcast.com and support this podcast. I don't know if you guys have a better elevator pitch, but that's what I have.
Nah, this is the NPR, like annual, hey, we need you to keep us on the air kind of thing if you like this. People have asked us before, make a Patreon so we don't have to remember to send you money and it'll just happen. Patreon takes a huge cut and like requires a bunch of extra work. So if you could just, fire up the old PayPal while we're talking about it right now, that would be great.
That'd be great. All right, Office Space reference done. Moving on. MTG updates in.
I'm going to need you to open up the PayPal.
That was good.
Yeah, Bryant, if you could do those TES reports, that would be great.
All right, since we're talking about the Epic Storm already, I'll dive right into my MTG updates. TheEpicStorm.com has been updated with all information for 11.6. If you're looking for card choices, sideboard guides, PDFs for deck lists, whatever you want, it's on there. Go check that out. And then I launched a new page yesterday for donation decks. If you're interested in me playing your combo deck, you can go to theepicstorm.com/donation decks. And what I find kind of cool is I've had some people reach out to me recently about how to make better YouTube content. And these aren't necessarily legacy players either. There's people that have seen my YouTube content through, me expanding to other formats or whatever. And they're just like asking for advice, which is like kind of cool. And I think one person that's changed how I think about YouTube a little bit recently would be Min from the MinMax blog. And Min sent me a video from some famous YouTuber that does like just generic video games. But they talked about how they started growing a lot more on YouTube once they realized that YouTube isn't a place to dump your Twitch VODs. And the concept came to them when they realized that they could stream 8 hours a day, every single day, but they'd have 16 hours of downtime all the time. And it wasn't good because you get burned out really quickly. And this person said, hey, I only stream like every other day now, if that. I upload to YouTube all the time, just YouTube exclusive content that actually generates more money than Twitch ever did for me. And just how Twitch is really saturated right now where YouTube isn't. So that's in the back of my head that like YouTube, the three of us are all YouTube content creators. I mean, Phil, you do some Twitch as well, but YouTube is like relatively unexplored still. I mean, Pleasant Kenobi is one of the largest people. Same thing with Tolarian Academy, or did I say that?
Community college.
Community college. But for the most part, like YouTube is untapped by the Magic community. And I think it's part of the reason maybe why Wizards of the Coast doesn't really care about YouTube content. Like if you're not streaming Arena on Twitch, do you matter?
Yeah, I ran into that this week. I was like, honestly, every time a new set comes out and I see all the content creators who are in the circle get their like sweet Time Spiral remastered wooden collectible box with a Lotus Bloom plaque in it and shit, I'm always like, wait a minute. I spend like 30 hours a week creating Magic content on top of my 40-hour-a-week job. How do I get that box? And like even just like some like Arena draft codes, like or whatever, like how can I get Wizards to support me? And I could not even get an answer from anyone about the content creator program. What is that? What it's called? The Wizards.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's only for Twitch streamers who stream Arena. So I'm just like double whammied by making YouTube content for Legacy and Modern and Vintage. It's just like I literally couldn't even get someone in a chat or on the phone to tell me, no, we don't do that. Yeah, big pain in the ass there.
Yeah. I do want to echo what Bryant said. Now that I'm producing content for YouTube and now that I'm doing some minimal editing of like downtime out, making thumbnails and stuff, the YouTube content creator experience is so much more pleasant than the Twitch content creator experience. Because on Twitch, you're not really discoverable, right? And on YouTube, you are, especially if you put work into it. And so I am seeing just mountains of growth on YouTube, whereas my Twitch stuff, while very, very slowly ticking up, has largely been stagnant.
That's one of the things that video said is that YouTube, because you are discoverable, people can search for what you make. You will gain subscribers on Twitch by doing more YouTube content. Just because people are going to see your content on YouTube, remember that, subscribe on Twitch, and slowly over time, it will boost both, like rising tides, all that good stuff.
Oh yeah, I guess I'm the only one that this regularly applies to, but I don't know how many times I've heard the words, "This is my first time catching you live, but I watch you on YouTube all the time." It's nice.
We are not sponsored by YouTube, although I wish we were.
I mean, YouTube does give us money, but not specifically to talk about it.
All right.
So I will hype anyone who gives me money.
So
The Eternal Glory podcast is now sponsored by YouTube.
fuck, man, we can slap a YouTube sticker on this. Let's go.
In all seriousness, who would we like to get sponsored by? Like, dream sponsorship. I mean, I imagine the New York Mets would be high on Bryant's list.
Are we still allowed to swear if we get sponsored? Because like, there's a few times per episode that we each drop it.
So I have learned from experience that I can turn it off. It's just a conscious effort. Like when I'm on friendlier podcasts, like I did Ponder podcast and I've done some other like wider audience stuff, I can in fact turn it off. And I don't swear like this when I'm in work meetings either.
Oh
So,
yeah,
but-
I have teacher mode. Like it's very easy to transition into that.
Yeah. Though just being from the American Northeast, the New Jersey is where I grew up, like an hour between New York and Philly, North Jersey, and fuck is a comma. Like it's not its own
Yep.
word. It's just like, man, the weather outside today, fuck, it's hot. like that's a comma in that sentence. Like that's just how I talk, and I have not been appropriately punished for it to make it stop.
All right. So how are your MTG updates going, Brian? Like, what have you been up to?
I just, in general, love Magic right now. I think that Vintage has been pretty dope for a while. I haven't played since Luris was unbanned. I'll caveat with that, but
It's still dope.
all right, good. I have trophies with Vintage, Legacy, and Modern decks over the last 2 or 3 weeks. They're all live on the channel. Like, trophying on camera is kind of hard because you're a lot dumber because you're trying to narrate and do all the tech stuff. I actually trophied a league with Rug Delver where I submitted a 67 card deck after sideboard. I just like boarded all the cards in and forgot to board the cards out, and still easily won that league. So that was, I'm just having a blast. Donation decks are through the roof because people are excited about Magic, and I get to play so many different decks because like people just come to me with these ideas, and my donation queue right now is just full of like I have like a Stifle Not Uro deck in the queue because like Uro and Dreadnought both like Stifle, and then I have like Electrostatic Pummeler and Pioneer, and just like everyone is excited. Like that deck was not playable when Teferi was in the format, so just the recent bans have just opened up so many things, and I'm stoked for it. Even Draft is great right now. Like when my downtime Magic, I don't play Magic Online, I play Arena and I draft because I want to keep up my constructed collection for next time I'm on the Pro Tour. Hopefully that happens someday, but it helps a lot to have cards, and Kaldheim is a great limited format. My exciting news is that at the end of this month, if my calculations are correct, it will be Friday, March 26th. I'll be at 250 YouTube videos, which is like a crazy milestone to me, considering that I didn't even really do this on purpose at first. It was just, I was dumping Twitch VODs, and then here we are, like 2 or 3 years later, whatever it is, and I have 250 videos up, and it feels good. I'll probably do some sort of promotion around that. I'm still figuring out how I want to do that, but I'm excited for it. My Patreon has a lot of traction right now, which is not something I expected either. I just started a Patreon when the pandemic hit, and I knew I couldn't play Magic for a while, but it actually has like, I think we're approaching like 30 patrons. I actually had to cap the donation deck list patron tier because I was running out of days of the month. Like I was going to have so many patrons who I owed a donation list to that I wouldn't be able to accept lists or play my own list ever in a month. And I had to cap that tier. Like
2 videos a day.
Yeah, it's like I can only handle 12 of you people, and the rest of you get in the line. But because I did that, I added discounts on donation decks to the lower tier, so everyone gets the cut. But yeah, and like my Discord's actually active. People are talking to each other about Magic, and yeah, it's pretty cool that that's happening.
Yeah,
and
I have a Discord for my Twitch subscribers as well, and there's regularly great discussions in there and very regularly interesting deck lists.
Yeah, I get some good deck lists that come through. The person who inspired me to make Teferi Vacation is one of my patrons, and they come up with some wild stuff. They're primarily an EDH player, and they are primarily like, is it combo decks? Bryant would like this person, but they always come in with like, okay, so I have this combo that is in my like Joyra Commander deck. I would like to see it converted into Legacy, and I have to be the bearer of bad news in like 99% of situations. But that 1% of the time, you get Teferi Vacation, and it's pretty exciting. And finally, this Magic the Gathering update, Time Spiral Remastered. Holy guacamole. I know Bryant doesn't like the new frame. He doesn't like reprints no matter how sweet they are. But these old frame Magic cards, I have spent, I think, $700 on pre-order singles. And that's without the Thoughtseizes and without any foils. That's just the other cards I wanted. And that's not counting the 2 boxes I have on hold from my LGS either. Like, I'm going to be easily $1,000 deep on this set. And I don't think I've spent $1,000 on Magic in 2 years total.
So LSV tweeted out, why can't all cards just go back to being this? What if we fix the what is it called? Accessibility issues on the white cards? Because it's really the white cards are the problem. Like there's just not enough contrast for people that are visually impaired to be able to read some of this stuff. Like I think when I went to the eye doctor this year, they said 30/20 vision. Like my vision's pretty good. And I have trouble reading the artist on the cards because the white is so close to the white of the frame. And that's like a pretty big issue. So we can't do that. So there has to be a way of fixing it somehow. Like there's probably some way they need to darken up the white frames a little bit maybe, but there's a way of making it happen. I just don't even know if Wizards wants to go back because as sweet as the old frames are, they're not bringing in kids. And that's the big thing. Like the old frames, they remind me of like 80s Dungeons and Dragons, which is sweet because like I like that stuff. But as a 12-year-old kid, if I had to pick a game, do I want to pick the thing that looks like it's from the 80s or do I want to pick something that looks like it's from my era, like a video game or whatever?
Do you want to pick the thing that it literally has Rick from Walking Dead on it?
I mean, I love The Walking Dead, so yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so that I wasn't being sarcastic. Like that was real. So my position is not in any way that the old frame is better. It's just that I like it because it's nostalgic to me. And to further your point about the accessibility issues, it's not just the white cards. Like because of editing deep analysis and stuff where I have to put a lot of cards on screen over the course of the hour, I spend a lot of time in Scryfall looking at all of the printings of every card that I might want to put on the screen to see which one is most look-atable. And it's always the newest one. Just invariably, whatever the newest printing of a card is the best looking one from a readability standpoint. If you just pick a random card like Nature's Claim or like Cancel, something with a million printings, just go click through Scryfall. Even like same art, 1 year apart, the newer one will be better. They will have adjusted the green in the border just a little bit or like darken the text just a little bit and it will look better. And I feel that. And when I was ordering my Old Border Containment Priest, I was like, this card doesn't even have a name. And like they do look bad in a lot of ways, but they also just appeal to something in people like me. Like that is for me. And the set itself is for everyone else. Like for the newer people who just didn't get to draft Time Spiral, which was a amazing set. Like Time Spiral is also just full of bangers like Teleria West and Dryad Arbor and just a bunch of cards like Tarmogoyf that people want. So the rest of the set's for them, and then you get maniacs like me just dropping $1,000 on singles.
So when I started playing Magic, it was Invasion, and like a year went by, 7th edition happens, and then Odyssey. I should have this like ingrained in my head, but I don't. I completely forgot that flashback cards had the Tombstone on them, and I've cast so many Cabal Therapies in my life. Like I have no excuse. But when they're like, "Oh yeah, the Tomb's back," I was like, "Holy shit, yeah!" Like those were there. Like it's just been so long that it's not something I've thought about in years.
Yeah, back when they showed you at the top of the card that the card did something in your graveyard. They did that so when you fanned out your graveyard, you knew what you could do in there. Which is like super cool because this was before you could reorganize your graveyard.
Yeah.
Which you still can't do in Legacy.
I was going to say, yeah.
You can in most formats.
I could probably look it up, but does Icarid have it? I imagine it does.
Yes.
Yeah, it does.
And now Stinkweed Imp does. I think that's so cool. Though it would tilt me that Golgari Thug and Golgari Grave Troll don't. So I don't think I would move in on that if I was a Dredge player, unfortunately.
All right, Phil, we've been blabbering enough. What have you been up to?
My growth on YouTube is making me feel all warm and fuzzy on the inside. Like, I picked up about 500 subscribers in the last month, which makes me feel really good. My video view counts have been way more consistent. Like, people are taking the time to throw me a like when they watch the video now, and it's helping out a lot. Like, I had a video this week, like, break 5,000 views, and it's still going. I have another one from today that's probably going to do the same. And it's just really validating to, like, start working on something and then, like, see the progress happen and keep happening and keep happening. And that's just made me feel so good about content creation. And Legacy's also fun while I'm doing it. So there's a lot of days where it's like, hey, I have 2 hours. Like, can I squeeze in a league today? I'm going to squeeze in a league today.
I'm sure
And
the both of you have noticed this, but so as you grow, you have your most popular uploads. It feels like my most popular uploads is all recent videos now, just because I keep on growing and growing, and more people are watching the new stuff than any of the old stuff. So the stuff that I thought would never get past is now my 5th most popular video or whatever.
Yeah, that's just the law of averages. Like I briefly worked in door-to-door sales. Let me tell you about jobs that I am not cut out for, but I did it for about 2 weeks. And you literally just talk to as many people as you can in a day because some number of them will say yes. It's not about selling any one individual person. And then like as your sub count grows, then your early clicks grow, which gets you in the algorithm, then your impressions grow, then your clicks grow, and it just self-feeding cycle. And yeah, having new videos that just are your most viewed videos because they're new is a good feeling.
So outside of the YouTube stuff, which I recommend my Hushbringer video if you're looking to watch one of mine in particular.
Banned from YouTube for Hushbringer's big sexy mouth.
Okay, I need to tell this story because otherwise that sounds weird. All right, so if you're not familiar with Hushbringer's art, the primary thing in the foreground is like a little fairy making like the little hush symbol with the finger over the mouth. But in the background, there's just this giant pair of lips to the right of this fairy. And so I made a thumbnail with this art and immediately got demonetized. And I was like, WTF? So I went and like looked at it and I'm like, wait, hold on. Do they think those are like big old blowjob lips? Is this too sexy for YouTube? So I re-uploaded the thumbnail with like Phyrexian Dreadnought over the lips, and sure enough, that's what it was. Hushbringer is too sexy for YouTube. You heard it here first.
I remember when that card came out. I remember going like, the art on that is terrible. It feels like someone just learned how to use Photoshop. Not to bash the artist, but like it looks very like high school Photoshoppy.
Yeah, it looks like a t-shirt you'd get at the mall in 1995. And like not in a store, like in a stand in the middle of the mall, like in the walkway. Right next to the 3 Wolf Moon shirts.
Oh god. All right, moving on. I am going to have an article up on greensunzenith.com this week. I did an article on the Death and Taxes versus Maverick matchup, so if you're in the mood to read about matches that last 50 minutes, check that out. And otherwise, this section's going kind of long, so let me just end it by saying, be good to each other. Magic Twitter's been a little rough in various ways recently. You know, if you can do something that supports the community and prop it up, go for it. And if you're posting something that just is like dunking on people all the time, maybe think about that.
Yeah, I do this cool thing that I learned through trial and error, where I type a tweet, then I think about it before I hit send. Just a little bit. Give it like 5 minutes to stew on that. Then decide, like, is this important? And then throw it away. I actually felt bad because Todd Anderson, who is a friendly acquaintance of mine in the Magic circles. We were both in the old Fahrenheit 451 Moto clan together back before he was famous or either of us had any results. And like, we've known each other a long time. And he just like stumbled into my mentions this week. We were talking about Dreadhorde Arcanist, and he was like, the play patterns didn't seem that different to me than Stoneforge Mystic.
I saw that.
And instantly the Legacy community was just on it. And I was like, oh no, Todd, what have you done? I hope you mute this immediately. And I think he did, because he didn't respond or do anything else after that, saying that. So, but yeah, the Legacy community is just looking for someone to punch right now. And I'm not sure why, because Legacy's great.
Yeah, format's good. Get out there and play. Get off of Twitter, man. Unless you're looking for deck lists, in which case there's some wild shit out there.
I've been playing a lot. Outside of, like, I've been finding time to play Legacy after I record other formats. I'm on one of the worst losing streaks I've been on in a while. Like, I'm at like 130 matches with a 50% win rate. Like, it's brutal.
Nature is healing.
It's been rough. And I'm like, it's not even one deck or archetype. Like, I'm losing to everything. So haters out there, enjoy.
So I don't mean to laugh. I'm obviously not a hater of the Epic Storm or Bryant. I like both of those things, but it remains a constant in my videos that if I go 1-4 with some shitty donation league, the one is the Epic Storm. I do not lose to the Epic Storm, and I actually I think it's going to release the same day as this podcast. I played Battle of Wits on the channel, and I lost more than I won, but you bet your ass I beat the Epic Storm.
I laugh. I too am also on a relative losing streak. I think I 4-1'd with zombies somehow, and then I've had a lot of 1-4 results, for reasons that I'll talk about in the episode itself, because, you know, Delver is good. Lots of Delver decks are good. But so many of the donation deck lists I'm playing right now are getting shit on by Wasteland and Stifle. It's not close. The decks that are built with like suboptimal mana bases in the first place are on the struggle bus right now. It is brutal.
Yeah, motherfuckers act like they forgot about days.
All right, so the topic for today, Delver didn't really go anywhere. Last episode we talked about how, you know, Legacy's wide open. You can play a bunch of different decks now. Like, you're no longer oppressed by Oko for a lot of strategies. I know Death and Tax has really appreciated that. But for the most part, Delver has been a tier 1 deck since 2011. That's a decade ago. It didn't go anywhere. Like, some people on Twitter, when we were talking about Arcanist, were like, no, blue decks will die if you get rid of Arcanist and Oko due to the other power creep. Are you kidding me? The Delver shell is so good.
Sweet summer child. Delver was good before it had Delver. It was good in 2008, 3 years before Delver was printed. It was a tier 1 deck then, and then it got the perfect card printed for it, and the core shell remains intact. It just occasionally gets broken by something else.
Yeah. So when you look at Goldfish data right now, and the reason I want to mention this is I was talking to some people, and they said, well, Death and Taxes is the top deck in Goldfish. Technically, yes. It's 4.2%. But when you look at the decks under it, they're like 3.8%, 3.7%. And then you get to the Delver variants. It's Rug Delver at 3.3, Blue Red Delver at 3%, Grixis Delver at 2.5%, Bug Delver at 1.4. That's 10.2% total. So these are different decks, but they're all the same archetype and same style. You get different flavors of Delver, but Delver itself is double what Death and Taxes is, and then some. So you get to pick your flavor, you know, your topping, but for the most part, Delver's still the king.
Yeah, let me just ask this: if you were to pick a number and say like Death and Taxes is in the top X number of decks in the format, what is X right now?
You mean for most played or best?
Quality, yeah, best.
10.
Yeah, I would put it at somewhere between 5 and 10 as well. Like, I got a couple of messages that were like, so D&T is the best format in Legacy, and my response was, what? No. And I laughed. The deck still has problems. Like, we'll talk about this later, because like Death and Taxes is going to be something that's going to be good against Delver, but like the deck's not perfect right now.
I think perfect decks get banned, so that's probably good.
Yeah.
Well, they get something banned, at least.
Yeah, Death and Taxes doesn't have any ban-worthy cards. We don't play good cards in that deck.
Ban Aether Vial.
So this is a rhetorical question, but like, are the different flavors of Delver good for Legacy? Like, is that something we want to see? Do we want to see 4 to 5 different versions of Delver running around?
I like it, personally.
Yeah.
Yep. I think variety's good. It means there's real deck building options. Your choices matter. Multiple things are viable. And I think what's really important right now is that since we're seeing multiple Delver decks and they all feel good, that means that the format just didn't get solved immediately. There wasn't a default, this is the best deck now, and I really like that.
I've seen 1-drops this week that I haven't seen in a long time.
Hex Drinker, baby!
Monastery Swiftspear. I've even seen a few Terramanders. It's been wild.
Oh, I was on board for 2 or 3 of those. that Terramander.
Yeah. All right. One caveat though, I will say that it is hard as hell playing against Delver right now because you don't know what they have. You don't know if they're the Stifle build. You don't know if they're the Uro build, and those things are at 2 very different ends of the spectrum. And trying to figure out what to play around right now is really tough.
Except Checkmate Nerd, because you can stifle your Uro trigger and play both. The league I 5-0'd with for the channel had both.
Yeah, it's pretty common now. But what's weird to me is I'm running into some people that are running Hymn to Torok in their Grixis builds alongside Stifle. And I'm just sitting there going, like, those cards don't even work well together, and I'm losing. Like, I can't beat anything right now, so that's probably why. But I think that there's some deck building friction happening too, and we'll get to that. But lists are wild.
Yeah. And I don't think it's just the Delver decks that haven't settled yet. I would say the metagame more generally is still just absolutely wide open.
Yeah, I mean, like, your question about are all these flavors of Delver good for Legacy? Like, are all these flavors of Blue Soup good for Legacy? Like, now that you have to choose between, like, 2 or 3 colors and you don't just get all 5. Like, I've seen Bant, I've seen Bug. I think the Bug Uro decks are really good with, like, Intuition and Loam. Like, those decks seem really cool. And then there's Bant decks with, like, Noble Hierarch and Hull Breacher. And there's versions without Noble Hierarch that just go a little bigger. And then you got your traditional, like, Jeskai Miracles. Like, it's all out there. And Esper is great. Like, Callum's Esper Mentor deck. Oh, baby, it's like he's reached into my brain and pulled that deck out of it. Like, you can do whatever you want, and it's all a little bit different and all has different strengths and weaknesses, and that rules.
I think we're actually seeing a little bit of a delay almost. So I hate to go back to Goldfish results, but Grixis controls the second most played deck according to Goldfish. I think in my 125 matches, I might have faced it twice. And I talked to a few other people. They're like, yeah, I barely faced that deck. The weird thing is, I think week 1, it had a bunch of pilots. And then since then, it's been coasting and trickling down, but people are still playing it in here or there because it's the second deck in Goldfish. Like, it's weird to think, but Goldfish actually does have, like, quite a big influence over what people play and what people think about regarding formats.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Like Goldfish and MTG Top 8 are like the first 2 places that come to mind for me to like cruise deck lists and kind of get a feel for where things are at.
Yeah, I use Goldfish for everything. Like, if I just want to get a pulse of the metagame, or if I'm looking for a sweet deck through the 5.0s, or it's where I host my deck lists that are embedded in the video descriptions on YouTube. Like, I love Goldfish. When tournaments are happening and I'm making sideboard guides for Patreon, I screenshot Goldfish, like that nice spread they have with like the card image, and then I just like delete space underneath each one and put my board plan there, so you end up with this nice like Goldfish grid of sideboard plans. Like,
that's a really neat idea. I like that.
Yeah, Goldfish is straight fire. I stole it from Tariq Patel, by the way, so give him the real credit. But it's a really pretty way to lay out what people can reasonably expect in a metagame.
So let me ask a question. Why are the Delver decks still putting up these results? To like, tell me why Delver's good. Sell me on why Delver is, 10% of the format.
Well, Phil said it. You said it and Phil said it. There's 2 things converging. One is that the Delver Days Wasteland free counter magic card selection package is still intact. It just doesn't have raw card advantage anymore. And I felt that in my Delver League a lot. I played a match against Death and Taxes where I actually had to decide if I'm going to Lightning Bolt Mother of Runes or save the 2 bolts in my hand to go upstairs and try to race. And like, that was a meaningful choice where like in a Dreadhorde Arcanist or Oka world, you just bolt the mom because you'll win later. But like that was a meaningful choice to make. But that shell is still intact. And then on the other end, what's going on over there? What specifically are they up to? I haven't lost this many games to Stifle since like 2010. It's insane. Like, Stifle is back. Like, if I had to choose an it card in Legacy right now, it would be Stifle. Everyone's trying it. Phyrexian Dreadnought is emerging from the depths, and and it's playable again. People are stifling Uros, people are stifling fetch lands, and it's just really good. I had this crazy turn in a league I played recently where I was playing Bug Uro with some stifles in it, and I lined up a Flusterstorm, so I was like, they obviously have Stifle. When they cast a cantrip, I'll fetch, they'll stifle my fetch, and I'll fluster their cantrip and their Stifle, and we're done here. Like that's a sweet line that I like to line up. But they had 2 Stifles in their hand. So it was like, they cantrip, I fetch, they stifle, I fetch to fluster, they fetch stifle, and then I had nothing. And I was like, oh shit. I didn't plan for them having 2 stifles. So that card is back, and like you can play like remembering how to play around stifle, or for the youngins among us, learning how to play around stifle is a big part of the format again.
Also, here's the just casual reminder that sometimes you can't. So like you have, like, let's say you have Tundra and Fetch Land. Like, you can play around Stifle, and then you expose yourself to Wasteland. There's a lot of situations like that where you have to make a play on your turn, and so you make the coin flip, like, do I think they're more likely to have Stifle, or do I think they're more likely to have Wasteland? And then sometimes you're facing an ambiguous opener. Your like opponent plays Flooded Strand Pass, and you're sitting on this fetch land, and you're like, I really need both of these colors. What if they have Stifle? And this week I said the words like, okay, if my opponent has Stifle, they have it, but I need to fetch this here. And sure enough, the Flooded Strand was just indicative of a Delver deck, and I got.
I think I'm going to have a contrasting opinion here. Stifle traditionally, and I'm talking historically in Legacy, has been a card that when the Delver decks are low to the ground, it's good. But as the format gets a little bit larger, that card ends up getting cut. And once the format gets solved, it's cut. Some people are diehard Stifle players and will always play the card. Can't help those individuals. But when we look at Ren and 6 Delver, when we look at Oko Delver, and there's been other examples in the past, like Deathrite Delver didn't really play it. There's some people that did. But Stifle's a card that gets cut. I think when these Delver decks get solved, like H.J. Kaiser took second in a challenge, lost to Death and Taxes. H.J. did not play Stifle, one of the few. But I think we'll see Stifle leave as the metagame becomes defined. I could be wrong. Maybe the combination with Uro was good enough to make it stick around for once. But I think maybe we won't have to worry too long.
Yeah. 2 weeks ago, I thought Stifle was going to be good for 2 weeks. And here we are, and it's still feeling pretty darn good. But maybe that's just a sign that, like, things are moving a little bit more slowly than normal in terms of figuring out the way the metagame is working.
Yeah, that could be part of it. Like, the metagame will probably adjust. Stifle usually does end up gone. Like, the joke a couple years ago of no bad cards Delver. Stifle is the bad card they're talking about. That's where that name comes from. It's no Stifle Delver. And like that will eventually rotate out when the meta adjusts to it, but there is a giant X factor in Uro. Like, is this like mini Phyrexian Dreadnought interaction good enough to keep Stifle in your deck going long? Because the problem with Stifle is that in most matchups it's not good after turn 2 or whatever. But when you can just have some crazy pivot on turn 5 and now you have a 6/6, then that's a different story.
I'm not finding that I'm able to line up Uro and Stifle simultaneously very often. So I played 2 leagues with like a Dreadnought shell, and over those 2 leagues, I maybe did the Stifle Uro thing 3 times or something like that. I don't think that's super consistent. It's kind of a nice, like, oh, I did the thing that happens every once in a while, but I don't think it's a game plan.
Yeah, I don't either, for sure. It's just a thing that can exist in your deck that gives Stifle a little bit of staying power after it should be relevant.
One interesting thing that, I mean, I'm boring, so I find this interesting. You can clip that if you want. Is that these Delver decks are running basics. I've been playing Legacy since 2004. In my mind, Delver decks do not run basics, but I'm seeing basic islands on almost every Rug Delver list I'm seeing, which is just baffling to me, because you're used to seeing like 4 Wasteland, 3 Trop, 3 Volk fetches. and we're seeing one basic island, one basic mountain. Like, it's just weird.
Wow, cowards. Like, outside of straight up Is It Delver, I can't imagine. And I have, in the past, in ancient times, played one basic island or one basic forest in Delver. And, like, there was a time where Blood Moon was a huge problem, and if you just stick Tarmogoyf, you win. So, like, forest, there was a small argument, but you can't pick up forest for days, which is a bigger argument. But it turns out the best argument is just don't even fuck around with that stuff. Like, you're going to get Path to Exiled sometimes, and it's going to feel bad, but and sometimes you're not going to be able to bring back your Uro, and that's going to feel worse. So, like, there are not many games in a 3-color Delver deck where I would want to lead on basic island, unless my hand just has 2 more lands in it, which is not an exciting hand for a Delver deck. So it's just weird tension. I think sometimes you got to just take your medicine and play the best deck you can present and not worry about what your opponent's going to do.
I think a lot of people are scared of Blood Moon right now, which I understand. I don't know. I don't feel like the red prison decks are one of the absolute best things to be doing in Legacy. I feel like Fair Blue still has a lot of game against you. And
Wait, you mean 6 forces is good against the Chalice deck?
6 forces is good against the Chalice deck. The various mid-rangey control decks tend to have things like Teferi that can bounce your lock pieces.
Plague Engineer, which invalidates all your win conditions.
Yeah. Like, I am the first person to, like, jam a league with Red Prison when I think it's good, but I haven't fired it up yet. I think it's fine. And again, you see players like Basuda just, like, routinely doing well with the deck. But I think it's too on everyone's radar right now to be the deck.
Yeah, I'm seeing Hydroblasts in sideboards, and the only reason for that is that you don't want to lose to Blood Moon.
Looking at some of the results from last week, the Legacy Showcase was over the past weekend. There was 20 copies of Blue Red Delver and 16 copies of Rug Delver in this event. Like, it was everywhere, especially when you looked at the top 32. It was just scattered full of Blue Red and Rug Delver, which is part of the reason we're having this episode. And we covered a lot of the reasons why you would play this deck. But I think we talked about it in, like, the what would happen if Dreadhorde was banned. We said that deck gets to play Uro. It's just naturally the next best thing in Legacy, I think. Would you guys agree, disagree?
Yeah, I mean, shocked Pikachu face here, but the card that was, like, being considered by Wizards for banning in Legacy is still good in the new format, right? Like, we all know Uro is good. That was well established in the previous metagame. But now, playing Uro is a choice you make with, like, advantages and disadvantages to it.
Yeah, I think that it opened up some really cool deck building. Like I mentioned the bug Uro, where you can, like, intuition for Uro Loam Ravenscrime out of a fair deck, and that's just like boing eggplant emoji. Like, I love that. Like, I think that's really cool, and that's gonna feel miserable when you're not ready for it. You're gonna lose that game 1, but you board in Rest in Peace, and their deck's bad again, and that's just like metagame stuff. And, like, I do think Uro as just a powerful engine is cool when you don't have to Swords to Plowshares Dreadhorde Arcanist, and you could save it for Uro. I think that's healthy and fun.
Yeah, I felt like Uro is very answerable currently. Like, yeah, obviously it has games where it spirals things out of control, but I don't feel like that card's problematic. I saw some people on day 2 of the format, like, getting their pitchforks out already and sharpening them, but I think we're good.
Yeah, people forgot about Graveyard Hate. So, tomorrow at the time of this recording, so it'll already be out when you're all listening to this. One of my Patreon donation lists this month was Esper Extraction. This person sent me a list with 3 Surgicals and 3 Extirpates main. And I cut some number of those before I played. 6 is too many, but let me tell you, I have not had this many opponents go off in chat as I have in this league. Like, I think the first match in that league, I'm playing against Bant Miracles, and I just extract their Uro game 1. They just, like, play a turn 3 Uro, goes to the graveyard, I extract it in the end of the turn. They said in chat, "Are you on drugs?" Question mark, question mark, question mark. And then Surgical resolved, and I saw they had no way to win the game. And like, I think 3 or 4 of my 5 opponents got salty in chat, and I'm usually like between 0 and 1. Like most people don't rage on me on Magic Online, so you're doing something right. I ate a lot of Uros.
So why don't we switch over a little bit and let's talk about like ways that you can possibly combat these Delver decks, strategies, not necessarily decks. We will cover some decks, but overall, just what are good game plans versus these stifle Delver decks?
Hold on, let me get out my bat so we can beat that dead horse about how good basic lands are. Do we want to start
I'm just
there?
dusting off my soapbox here. I keep it on hand in case anyone asks me about basic lands in Legacy. Coming to you from the person who cut Tundra from his Miracle decks when they printed Prismatic Vista. Let me tell you, basic lands are dope, but you should play 1 Tundra. 0 is too few.
That's the biggest thing is basic lands are amazing, which it baffles my mind because there's some individuals online talking about how control decks aren't good anymore, and then I look at their decks. They're playing 4 colors and losing to Stifle Wasteland, and in my head I'm going, like Classic Miracle seems really good right now, but it just doesn't seem like enough people are playing it.
So this week I received a donation deck list that was a 4-color deck list that included 4 Wasteland. And the donor was on stream with me. I started doing the deck tech, and I started saying, like, all right, here's what I think the problems are with this mana base. And the donor just stopped me, and they're like, please, before you begin playing the league, fix my mana base. I didn't realize how greedy I was being.
Yeah, let's start by cutting 2 colors. Yeah, for sure. So the big problem with straight up blue-white miracles, even if we're talking like little splash, like you have some rebs in the sideboard, like I still consider that blue-white for the most part. Like the blue-white core miracle shell is a true control deck that is not gonna cheese wins. You're not gonna get anybody. Like Monastery Mentor can like blow out a fair player like Maverick or D&T, like backed by a force. Like you can get some cheesy wins that way. If you're main decking back to basics, that might get you something. But in general, you're going to be playing long 10, 12, 15 turn games. And in a wide open format like this, it's hard to answer everything that's going to happen over a series of 15 turn games. Like blue-white miracles thrives in a small metagame, not in a big one. Like that's just part of the problem. That's why we're not seeing them right now. Decks, we're seeing like Bant miracles that can pivot into like Hull Breach or Days Undoing when they need to be proactive. And while I'm not sure if that's great or the best thing you can be doing, like in a vacuum, in context of let's get this game over with, like if you're gonna fart around with this new format, I'm gonna kill you. Your deck needs to have that eject button on it. So Blue-White Miracles might be a ways away. It'll take somebody with brilliant meta prediction to do well in a tournament with that right now.
So I'm going to skip around a bit, but like since we're talking about it, I think a lot of those Bant miracles and miracles adjacent decks need to stop farting around with Days Undoing and just play more good cards in those slots. Like as a person who is usually playing fair non-blue decks, every time I see a Hull Breacher, I'm like, okay, you have a 3/2. And every time they have a Days Undoing in their hand, I don't care about that card the vast majority of the time. Like, from my perspective, those cards individually have looked very bad. Like, the blue decks have access to so many great cards. Why not play more Mentors, more Teferis, more Uros, or whatever, and cut that package?
So, I'm going to disagree with Brian a little bit. I think the Hull Breacher package is a lot better in a solved metagame because the Days Undoing combo package is better when the format's really blue. It is not as good when the format has more non-blue decks in it. Just because of the reasons that Phil said, where Phil doesn't care about a Hull Breacher unless there's a Days Undoing coming behind it. Phil's decks have removal, especially when your deck has so few targets. And then on top of that, like the Bant decks, they have such bad mana bases. Like I've seen screenshots where people have like a Caracas, a basic plains, a basic forest, like Mystic Sanctuary and 2 islands. Like it's disgusting.
The Mystic Sanctuary greed is very interesting to me. Like, I think that card is good. Putting Terminus back on top of your library is, like, such a gut-wrenching bad feeling from my side of the battlefield, usually, that I get wanting to have that. But I've seen a couple of, like, double Mystic Sanctuary, Forest, Caracas, Basic Plains sorts of things. Sometimes with a Wasteland in there, too. And I don't know, man. I don't like it.
Yeah, the number one comment I get on my Shark Still and, like, Mon Shark and, like, those sort of videos is, what about Mystic Sanctuary? It's like, bro, I have 3 basic planes and a Caracas in this deck. And I need to curve out. Like, I want that Teferi on 3. I want Standstill on 2. You can't play a ETB island, like ETB tapped island. And it's like, frequently the difference between winning and losing a game with a blue-white core control deck happens on turn 3 when you hit that land drop or not. Like, I will usually, like... anyone who watches my shit hears me say it all the time, like, Island Ponder, that's a keep. I will keep any hand with Island and Ponder in it in a blue-white control deck. And that's because I'm counting on my generally high land count and Ponder to find me the next 2 lands. And if it doesn't happen, you could lose. So, like, if that 3rd land, that 6th the Teferi, that gets the cantrip, takes the pressure off, digs for the 4th land, enters the battlefield tapped because it's Mystic Sanctuary, like, get out of here. That's bad deck building. You deserve it. Like, when I was spending my $1,000 on Time Spiral Remastered pre-orders, I almost didn't buy Mystic Sanctuaries. I figured at $8 I couldn't really lose, but I did get 2 of them, but I'm unlikely to ever play them because I just don't think that card makes sense. You're going to win the end game with a control deck. You need to survive the early game, and that's just a crushing endgame engine that, like, put Monastery Mentor in your deck. It'll do the same thing and also be good sometimes.
How do the two of you feel about a deck like Grixis Control? A deck that has worse mana, but better cards at pounding Delver into the ground.
I played against Delver with Paper Magic when I was a guest on one of the streams recently. Like, Culligan's Command is a thing of, like, Legacy Past, right? Like, we know how powerful that engine is, returning your Baleful Strix, like, always going and getting those 2-for-1s and sometimes more. That strategy's powerful. I don't know that I'm in love with Grixis right now, because sometimes your removal doesn't answer the creature correctly. When you're on Lightning Bolts and your opponent has a large-ish Tarmogoyf or something of that nature, and your removal doesn't actually remove the thing, that's awkward. And people are very cognizant of the existence of Plague Engineer right now. So I don't know that you're always getting, like, your 2-for-1s with Plague Engineer like you might want. I think Grixis is fine.
I'm going to point a finger with extreme prejudice at Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath. Grixis can't remove that card meaningfully without boarding in, like, Graveyard Hate. Like, they need to bring in Surgical to answer that thing long. There's no plow. Like, that's it. And they don't get to play it themselves. And, like, if you get into a game where, like, you're working hard to, like, Baleful Strix, Kolaghan's Command, returning Baleful Strix, like, if that's where your 2-for-1s are coming from, versus cast Uro, trigger. Bring back Uro, trigger. You Fatal Pushed it? Sure. I'm up 3 cards. Bring it back, trigger. Like, Grixis cannot beat that endgame. And Grixis is notoriously horrible at clocking. Like, generally, they want to win with that Baleful Strix and that Snapcaster Mage. And Uro gains 3 life. That undoes an entire turn of Baleful Strix and Snapcaster attacks. And those attacks are not coming in quick. Like, I think that Uro is the giant goalie keeping Grixis Control from its, like, 2017 level dominance, where it was just in every GP top 8. Like, there is a 1-card problem creature for that. And until they figure that out, that's going to be a problem.
I think Callum's deck actually is Grixis Control with her removal spells that can answer Uro.
Yes, I would agree with that assessment. It's the cantrip suite, hymn to Turok, etc. But instead of K command, he has Monastery Mentor, and instead of Fatal Push, he has Plow, and that is just better because Mentor can actually bully an Uro. Like that's a creature that can overpower Uro triggers just on raw stats, and like so it functional. Like I said, Grixis doesn't have Uro. Esper doesn't have Uro either, but it has Mentor, which does a very similar thing. So I think that Callum's deck was built very smartly for the metagame.
Grixis just feels beatable to me. Like a lot of times I feel like they stick one of their premier cards and it's just like, okay, I have 6 turns. Like they stick a Liliana the Last Hope. That doesn't end the game for a long time. And I don't know if that's where you want to be right now.
So to switch modes a little bit, let's talk about strategies that you can use to beat Delver other than decks, like control decks with good mana. So one thing that I'm finding is a lot of these decks are playing Stifle, and that's fair. Like outside of H.J. Kaiser, most of them have Stifle. But they're playing cards that baffle me, like Hymn to Turok alongside Stifle. Like if you're running a Stifle deck, you want more cards that allow you to leave your mana open, which is why you tend to see Spell Pierce instead of Thoughtseize in those decks. If you're running Stifle, Thoughtseize can be a little, awkward because you're not protecting yourself on multiple axes. So it's really weird to me when I see really expensive cards like True Name Nemesis with Stifle, Uro with Stifle. Granted, Uro works well if you Stifle it, but these are really mana and time consuming plays. So when your opponents do decide, hey, I need to eventually play my clock, that's when you use your fetch lands. Like one of the biggest mistakes I see is people not being patient enough, or feeling that they're pressured to fetch into this Stifle. A lot of times I'll just sit there and take a couple beatings from a Delver if I know that I'm going to be able to get a spot where I'm going to take advantage.
Yeah, I've encountered some of this too, where like your opponent is playing Stifle and they're also playing Hex Drinker, and there's a very real choice there to be made about like how your mana is going to be using and what fight you're playing in that specific game. So there's definitely holes that you can take advantage of now. I don't know how long those holes are going to be there for though. Like, I think we're going to have a bunch of different viable flavors of Delver, but I think the lists are going to tighten up real quick, because the decks people are playing right now are good. Well, not me specifically, but most normal people.
Well, Phil, I think you're half to blame. I faced False Cure 3 times this week. So people are out there just running wild decks, and you're usually the culprit.
Yeah, I am very frequently at fault for some of the bullshit in leagues. I'm not gonna say I'm sorry because like I'm causing people to have fun, but I am definitely obliterating play points other than just my own.
So speaking of Phil ruining the format, in my Delver League on the channel, the 2 best, most memorable, and genuinely most difficult matchups that I beat were Death and Taxes, which is not a surprise, and Esper Curses. It was like Esper Dead Guy L Curses. And I don't know, Phil, I don't know if you've streamed that deck or if you made that deck or if it came from you, but it felt like a Phil deck when I was playing against it.
Yeah, that would be one of my regular followers and supporters.
Yep, we had a phenomenal match. And guess what, you Stifle haters? I won the match by stifling a Cruel Reality trigger to get in for lethal before my creatures got sacrificed.
All right, Phil, I think we've come to the point of the episode where you tell us that Death and Taxes isn't good or something like that, right?
I mean, Death and Taxes is good. I don't know that it's great. So I think Death and Taxes is really good against Delver, and it's really good against most flavor of Delver. Of the various things running around right now, I'm probably most afraid of Blue-Red Delver with Sprite Dragons. That deck pressures you really hard and has reach. That's probably what I'm most scared of, because Death and Taxes will take over the games when they go long, and you give us time to do our stuff.
You mean the 12 basic planes is good against the Wasteland deck? That has
Yeah, it's
also,
weird.
Death and Taxes doesn't have a whole lot of Stifle targets. Like, there's some, but for the most part, there's not many.
Yeah, the difference is the stifle targets aren't in the early game, right? The stifle targets are in the late game instead, when you're stifling flicker wisps and recruiters and stone forges and things like that. And a lot of times Delver is using stifle to get the opponent off balance in the early game, and you're just like plains Mom, plains Thalia, and the stifle looks really bad against those sorts of hands.
Going back to the reach thing, that's why I'm always hesitant whenever people like claim that Bug Delver is the best variant for any period of time. Like, it certainly happened when broken things like Deathrite Shaman happened, but Deathrite was a black reach spell. Whenever Delver doesn't have reach, I feel so much more comfortable. Like, when I don't have to worry about dying out of nowhere, it's really nice.
Yep. Yeah. Every time I'm playing against Delver on the channel, I'm like, we're good at 17, we're good at 14, we're good at 11. All right, we got to stop this thing before we're at 8. Like, I want to be comfortably above 6 life. Like, I want to be the double bolt range plus 2 or 3 fetch lands as the game goes on before I actually feel good about my position against Delver. And Bug, you just don't care. Like, you could be at 1, it's the same thing.
All right, Phil. So, you mentioned that Thassa's Oracle decks are a problem for Death and Taxes, and that's why it's not the best deck in the format. Do you want to elaborate on this at all?
Yeah, so matchups like Doomsday and Oops All Spells, generally speaking, are really quite difficult, and there often aren't great sideboard cards to deal with those things without playing a bunch of things that are either too narrow or like hurt you in some way. I haven't fired this off yet, but if I was like seriously testing D&T for an event right now, I might think about like messing around with some Hushbringers or something in the sideboard. And I know that's absolute crazy talk because of like how many ETB creatures are in this deck in the first place, but Thassa's Oracle specifically is a huge problem. The issue with something like Hushbringer, though, is that it costs 2 mana, and that's still slow. So then you're also needing things like Deafening Silence to get to turn 2.
Well,
so
that's actually something I wanted to talk about. So when you look at the combo decks in the format right now, Doomsday's like really high up there. It's a really good deck. Death and Taxes doesn't play meaningful cards for it, which is so strange to me. Like, I would be maxing out on Spirit of the Labyrinth right now, because like it's really good against the Delver decks. At least they have to bolt it, which means your Thalia lives or something else, because the deck has no card advantage, like Brian said. So that means that these Ponders and Brainstorms matter way more than they ever did before. And, you know, Spirit's really good there. Hushbringer makes a lot of sense being a Torpor Orb. We're not seeing those cards. Like, Spirit of the Labyrinth is like, what, a 2, sometimes 3 of? And, like,
yeah,
Hushbringer doesn't see any play. But meanwhile, they're playing Deafening Silence and Mindbreak, which are amazing against me. But, like, Ant this weekend, 5 pilots, 0 match wins. So like TES isn't doing well, Ant's not doing well. Why don't you adjust some of these sideboard cards? And I know it sounds disingenuous coming from me, but people aren't fixing their problem matches. Like Deafening Silence and Mindbreak, I get screenshots from Max Carini, Wonder Pro, all the time of him beating these cards, just being like, nice Plains deck.
Yeah. So one of the big issues with Spirit of the Labyrinth specifically right now is that there's a good amount of Plague Engineer in the format, or at the very least you need to respect Plague Engineer as being a very real card that you're going to regularly face. And Death and Taxes has a lot of X1s already, and when you pile a couple more Spirit of the Labyrinths into your main deck, you end up really soft to things like Plague Engineer and Forkbolt and Lily Last Hope, in a way that costs you a lot of percentage points elsewhere.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second.
Yeah, go for it.
Aren't you happy if they're naming Spirit?
Not really. So, like, if you lose a Spirit and then the Plague Engineer is also around to trade with one of your other relevant bodies, like, that's still a really strong body blow. Like, you took a massive hit there. Like, I know the dream is often like, oh, you just name it on human and it shuts off a huge portion of the deck. But the reality is, like, a Plague Engineer hitting on human is great. It hitting on an elemental and stopping a lot of your shenanigans ends up being great, too. The body that it leaves around afterwards, even if your call is wrong, is just good.
Yeah, plus the that Plague Engineer on Spirit represents like a reversal of virtual card advantage. Like the Spirit arrives, shuts down the cantrips in their hand and any they draw until they remove it. But then when the Plague Engineer does arrive, it's like bang, 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 make it rain. My hand is now perfect. So there's like there's some push and pull with that where like, yeah, you might have to pass up a 2 or 3 for 1 to get the one important thing out, but that one important card is worth all of those bodies in play most of the time.
Yeah. And another thing here, like some people are toying with bringing Phyrexian Revoker back into the deck. Like that's another X1, right? That one is less of a Plague Engineer problem because, like, you know, if you hit a 1 of and for naming horror, like, okay, sure, that one's fine for sure. Some people are trying Revoker as a way to have a little extra game versus Planeswalkers in game 1, or, you know, have another relevant card versus Red Prison.
But couldn't you run some of these in the board? Like if Doomsday's the boogeyman, like you could be boarding some of this stuff, right? Like it doesn't necessarily have to be in the main deck. These are just random thoughts, and I could be completely wrong.
Yeah, I've played 2 Spirit of the Labyrinth in the sideboard in a lot of Death and Taxes lists and been relatively happy with them.
Isn't Doomsday just getting pounded by this Stifle metagame anyway?
You'd think it's still putting up a lot of results. It's just the deck has so much interaction, and at some point they started to play Flusterstorm in their Doomsday piles, because like for a long time that deck just wasn't playing Flusterstorm. And now the way that it works is when you sacrifice your Lion's Eye Diamond, you're drawing Oracle and Fluster.
I got by that this week. I thought I was so safe. Kind of following up on the Death and Taxes a bit. I haven't felt like I've seen a good Death and Tax. Well, all right, let me phrase that. I don't feel like I've seen the Death and Taxes list yet. Like, there are plenty of lists that look fine to me, but I haven't felt like anyone's really figured out what the deck should look like yet. The sideboards feel like a mess. I don't really know that anyone has like found a great configuration of like main deck creatures either. And people are, as always, doing various levels of greed with their mana base in the main deck. I've seen some people experimenting with some things that are cool. I saw one person messing around with a red splash just for Magus of the Moon, and I think it was like mostly off Caverns or something like that. That one raised an eyebrow because like the Blood Moon effects are good in the metagame and no one is currently thinking about red Death and Taxes. Like, I thought my opponent was on humans for a while, and then I lost to Magus. Like, that was the sort of thing that was going on. So, I don't know. I really like Death and Taxes for challenges right now, where you're expecting to play against just a pile of Delver decks. But I don't feel gung-ho about leagues with it.
So, Death and Taxes has this, like, a strange cousin, right? Plays a splash color.
Yeah, I like that cousin. I picked that. Yeah, I mean, we know I love that deck. That deck, I think, has like up to like 7,000 or 8,000 views on my YouTube now. Like, people are still watching that Opposition Agent Dead Guy Ale list video all the time.
I literally forgot Opposition Agent is a card until you said that just now. That has not appeared once in this new metagame. Wow. All right, continue with your friend of Death and Taxes, this mysterious friend.
Yeah, good old Maverick. So last episode, I think that was my pick for something that I would be experimenting with if I was testing for a tournament, and I still feel pretty strongly about that. I feel like a deck with good solid mana and a good anti-Delver game is an okay place to be right now. But I think Maverick has a lot of the weaknesses that Death and Taxes does against these same sorts of like Thassa's Oracle decks and fast combo decks.
It's worth noting that Maverick can play Thoughtseize, which helps a little bit. That said, their mana base is a little bit weaker to Wasteland and Stifle, but they gain the huge gigantic booty of Night of the Reliquary.
Yes.
Let me tell you, I was playing against 4-color Loam, which is not Maverick, but it's also a Night deck, with Rug Delver the other day, and I was using the base of Rich Callie's list that he's been posting, and it doesn't have Submerge in it. There's 2 Brazen Borrowers and a Dismember, and that Knight came down as a 6/6. I was like, oh shit, There is nothing here that can win the game except clocking them over the top. Like, I need Delvers, right meow. And that's all I got. That was a welcome to the format kind of moment for me.
I have no idea whether or not the Maverick decks are supposed to be green-white or junk right now. Because, like, Plague Engineer is great. I think having access to Thoughtseize and Discard is really strong, too. But, like, Solid Mana is so good. I haven't come down on either side of that equation yet for Maverick specifically.
When the format first, developed, I was like, I'm going to shave a couple carpets. I'm going to go down. And now I'm just slowly adding carpet by carpet. Like, by this time, 2 weeks, I'll probably have added number 4 right back into the sideboard. I'm playing 3 right now, but just Delver's never going anywhere. We're stuck with it. It is the ex-wife with the alimony check or something like that. Some bad joke.
Yeah, I like I said at the beginning of this episode, I think that Delver is a healthy legacy deck. It's just always on the edge of breaking. Like, it's always a Deathrite Shaman, a Gitaxian Probe, a Wrenn and 6, an Oko, a Dreadhorde Arcanist away from breaking. It exists on that razor's edge. And, like, I think I've made this point on the channel before, like, when Death Shadow broke in Modern, that first GP where it, like, all 3 of the people who played Death Shadow made top 8, and people were like, oh my god, ban this card. If the best deck in your format is a creature deck, an interactive creature deck, like, that's okay. That's fine. That's not a format that is necessarily unhealthy. So I like when, like, good back and forth decisions are relevant, no snowball horseshit. Delver is viable.
For what it's worth, I'd like to clarify, I'm not saying that Delver should have something banned or anything like that. I'm not claiming that at all. It'd just be nice if we had, like, a short sabbatical.
But, like, the historic watch list on Arena. Like, when they, like, shadow ban cards for a little while just to see what the format looks like, and then they officially ban it later. Just, all right, Delver, maybe, how about this? You should begin a campaign on social media to ask people in a gentleman's agreement not to play Delver in an upcoming challenge.
Oh, like Mystical Tutor.
Yeah, nobody gets to play Delver.
All right, better idea. What if instead of doing that, we get everyone to play Belcher in a challenge? Oh, wait, we already did that one. Rats. We have to pick a different deck.
All right, so this last deck I'm going to suggest, I'm not actually sold on it being good, but people are talking about it being good again. Lands. And I think the only reason you could argue that Lands is good again is Punishing Fire has been unlocked. The big threats of the format that were there, being Dreadhorde, had 3 butts. Elks had 3 butts. The Planeswalkers, gained a lot of loyalty. Is Lands good? Jarvis has said for a very long time that deck has an awful mana base. It runs like 1 basic, not as many lands as it should. I'm actually not super sold on it being great, but people say it is. Am I wrong?
I haven't lost to any flavor of it yet. Be it 4-color loam, actual red-green lands, even depths, like post-ban world. I have not lost to any of those decks. The only loam decks I'm losing to are the ones that are dredging Uro. And the big part of that is Force of Negation. Just that card existing as a main deck graveyard hate that isn't embarrassing in other spots. Like when your Scavenging Ooze can also counter Chalice of the Void. Like, that's just such a magic card to have access to. And Force of Negation has never existed independent of some broken Delver horseshit. Like, it was in the same set as Wrenn and 6, and then when Wrenn was gone, we were already into Oko and Dreadhorde Arcanist. Like, we haven't had just fair Force of Negation going up against loam decks before. And it has come up a number of times where, like, I played loam once, and I was like, if they Force of Will this, it's fine. If they Force of Negation it, we lose. And I've been on the other side where I Force Negation in hand. I'm just like, well, it's going to be hard to lose this one. Like, my board is 2 Delvers and they're at 10 life, and they have 2 Grove of the Burn Willows, but I don't even care if they draw Punishing Fire because it's gone. So that's a big deal. Callum's Esper list that we've mentioned a couple times already, it played 3 Force of Will and 2 Force of Negation. So he made the conscious decision that the hardcast ability and the exile clause are worth more than countering creatures, which is really interesting. Like, that's the sign that somebody did the math and built a good deck.
It's also the fact that Callum's deck just pounds creatures into the ground, like swords, Strix, Snap, like of one mind.
The of one mind endgame too is just brutal. Like, you draw an of one mind, it draws you into a second, and then all of a sudden you have just buried your opponents in cards when you were otherwise at parity.
Yeah, the fucked up thing that really got me was, like, you fire off an of one mind, maybe even you pay full cost for it on, like, turn 4 or 5, and then, like, 3 turns later, you have a Baleful Strix, and then you Snapcaster of one mind for 1. And it's like, oh, baby. Get it in. That, yeah. I don't want to go on a full side tangent about how beautiful that deck is, but yeah, Force of Negation being an actual deck building choice and not just more Force of Wills is a really interesting deck building space too.
Kind of talking about the other portion of lands that's really popular, the Punishing Fire portion. I'm not sure that hits enough things in the format right now. Like, Goyf is pretty common. Sprite Dragons are often getting out of Punishing Fire range pretty quickly. There's still other delve threats around, like Garmag Angler, Mandrels, the good old Whale, too. Like, Punishing Fire doesn't kill Uro. There's a bunch of relevant things that Punishing Fire misses that makes me not want to be trying to use that as part of a lock engine.
I don't think the Whale's any good, but your point still stands.
I also think the Whale is loose, but I'm seeing a lot of it. Which loops us back around to trusty old Blue-White Miracles. When people remember Rest in Peace as a card, all this Uro shit, all this Loam shit, all the Punishing Fire shit, these Delve threats, this Whale, they're all gone. Don't forget about Rest in Peace. It might be time to bring back Energy Field. Let's just do that. Though there are a lot of abrupt decays in the format right now, so maybe not. But Rest in Peace
I didn't put it in the show notes, but it's going to tickle Brian's fancy. I think Elves is secretly a top 3 deck right now, and there's not enough pilots. You can't lose to Delver in game 1. If you can find a way to beat the 2-Wolf Rough Tumble in the board, I think that deck is going to be very, very good.
Yeah, Elves is insane. That deck I think it has been a top tier deck this whole time. Like, I think it has secretly been great against even the fully powered Rug Delver deck. Snoko had the Plague Engineer, but that's it. I mean, that's a big but that's about all they had. Elves is a better card draw deck than the control decks. It's a better aggro deck than the aggro decks, and really Plague Engineer is the only thing checking it right now, because the addition of Allosaurus Shepherd really, like, the Chalice decks that used to be kind of tough are just not anymore. And like even the blue decks, like, they build up that handful of counter magic, and then you just sequence your Shepherd into natural order.
They're faster now.
I've been losing a lot of games.
Like, I lose to Elves.
Yeah, because they don't have to respect counter spells at all.
Well, I'm losing to Elves more often than ever. Like, I haven't gotten much slower. So I think the Elves decks have sped up due to playing Nettle Sentinels again. For a long time, they were cutting them, and they became like this turn 4 deck. I can't tell you how many times I've passed the game on turn 2 after playing Claw, only to have my Elf player murder me on their turn 2.
Yeah, there's been the... for those of you who are not up to date on the Elves evolution, there's been 2 firm camps for a while, and it's the Julian Nab Get 'em Dead camp and the Hello Newton Let's Kinda Be Maverick camp, with like Elvish Reclaimer and like a small toolbox of lands, and just, you're basically mono green Maverick with a combo kill. But the Julian build that's just like 4 Shepherd, 4 Heritage Druid, 4 Nettle Sentinel, I want to tap Heritage Druid for mana on turn 2 every game. Like, that's the deck that I think is good.
Agreed.
Like, the one that has no respect for counter magic and can kill you before Plague Engineer comes down.
I saw a screenshot. I think it was Julian that he was playing like the green ley line that gave your elves or your creatures, I guess, like +1 or something like that to make sure that
Abundance?
they
Yep.
live.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right. So that they live through Plague Engineer.
It's like a Soul Warden too, right? It's like a Soul
Yeah.
Warden that gives all your creatures +0/+1. Yeah.
I like the ideas being explored. I don't know that I get to call it good because I haven't seen it in action, but I like what's going on there.
I mean, Spider Silk Armor is an expensive card on Magic Online because it is in every Pauper green deck to beat the electricaries of the format. So this tech has a strong pedigree in other Eternal formats.
All right. Do we have any final sleeper picks?
Well, I mean, we haven't rambled on for 2 hours yet, so let me bring up something that was in the show notes that we didn't explicitly cover. What do you all think of like Stoneblade decks right now?
I don't like them.
It's just Dreadhorde Arcanist, right? It's the same play
You
pattern.
shouldn't make fun of your friends, Brian.
No, I'm not. It's just it is funny how similar those two cards look on the surface and how completely different they are. And I'm not gonna dig into that because Dreadhorde Arcanist is gone and we don't need to talk about it anymore. Though I'm glad I didn't have to buy that card in alt frame. I lied. I did. I bought it for vintage.
Yeah.
But it was much cheaper than it would have been otherwise. So the thing about Stoneblade is that when the whole format is ready to pound on creatures or is like playing Stifle, like Stifle is a functional removal spell for a Stoneforge Mystic. If you have the Stifle when it arrives, you can buy a lot of tempo, stifling the put the Batterskull in trigger. You could stifle the Germ token trigger. You can stifle an equipment, like when they go to invest the mana to equip their Sword of Fire and Ice, you can stifle that. Like Stifle plays real good against Stoneforge Mystic, and Stoneforge Mystic just takes us back to that simpler time where like, whereas Dreadhorde Arcanist arriving on 2 was like, this has to die now. The Stoneforge Mystic, you see what they got. That tells you a lot about their plan. It's like, okay, they got the Batterskull, so I can decide if I want to beat this Stoneforge Mystic now, or if I'm holding like Ancient Grudge, maybe I'll just wait for them to deploy the Batterskull. If they get like Jitte in a matchup, it's like, okay, they are planning on putting this on something and then connecting with it. That's a 4 mana plus an attack step that I have to maneuver through this. I can overload I can just save my removal to pick off whatever they equip, or I can try to remove the Stoneforge now. And like, you get Stoneforge kind of dictates how a game goes, but in a way that is interesting and honestly I don't think very good. Like Lightning Bolt, Abrupt Decay, Stifle, Fatal Push, just this is, if you want a dies to removal argument, Stoneforge Mystic is it.
Yeah, this is something that I feel like I saw people messing around with for a couple of days, and then I just didn't see it anymore, basically at all. Like, I saw some initial lists that looked kind of cool, like people were busting out like Stoneforges and Bobs, and I saw the Ethereal Forager in a Stoneblade shell, which I think I liked better than seeing it in a lot of other shells, like rebuying like a discard spell, a cantrip, and a Swords to Plowshares all at the same time, so you have that range was pretty cool, and like you had good targets for the early game, so it just wasn't getting removed on sight because you weren't playing other creatures. But I haven't run into a Stoneblade list in the last maybe week and a half, probably.
So I think the real weakness of Stoneforge Mystic, just at the macro level, is Plague Engineer. Like, the game used to be like, I'll test you with my Stoneforge Mystic. If you answer it, that clears the way for my True Name Nemesis. But that card is not very good anymore. And like, Stoneforge Mystic is not a plan. Stoneforge Mystic as a test spell is phenomenal. Like that Esper Curses deck I played against, that was a Stoneforge Mystic deck. Like, I actually thought they were Esper Stoneblade for 1.5 games until they suddenly hit me with a curse of misfortunes because I had wasted all my energy dealing with the Stoneforge Mystic and the equipment, and I was just out of gas. Like, that is a plan. Like, you got to have a round 2. You need that Stoneforge Mystic, you need that Jace to follow up once they've answered your 2-drop. But with clean answers and like things like Uro just overpowering something like True Name Nemesis, like, forget about Plague Engineer. Uro blanks True Name Nemesis. They just stare at each other. And it's actually worse than that because Uro can crunch into True Name, gain 3 life, draw a card, and then just get blocked and do it again next turn. So True Name Nemesis is not what it once was, and you're going to need some kind of backup plan, like Maverick following up with Knight of the Reliquary, Death and Taxes having the Flicker Wisp and the other stuff to complement it, but just blue-based Stoneblade does not seem good right now.
A deck that I thought was going to do really well in the showcase that just didn't show up was Hogak. We talk about that deck every couple episodes, I feel like, because it's the secret blue killer. And with Delver being a large portion of the competitive metagame, you'd think there'd be some people wanting free wins with Hogak. Is the format too wide right now for a deck like Hogak to exist?
No, I don't think so, and it's weird that I'm mentioning him twice in one episode when I've never talked about him before, but I'm sure if Tarek Patel was playing in a Legacy event this weekend, he would be on Hogak. Like, there are believers. Like, I know Hogak is supported a lot among the Star City grinders, many of whom have sort of fallen out of relevance over the past year when there were no Star City events, but I don't know if they're going to come back or if they went and got jobs or what. But I know that like Dom Harvey is a big Hogak believer, and like Cat Light and that group of people are on that Hogak train. And I'm sure that if you have a mind that's interested in playing Hogak anyway, you could find the spot. But if you're just a Legacy player and trying to have fun in this new open world, your brain isn't like, oh yeah, Hogak. So I think just the Magic Online metagame where nothing is really important, like league play is whatever. A league is like $10 and 2 hours of your time, and even a challenge, like those are important to some people, but also it's not like a Grand Prix. There's not a Pro Tour invite on the line or whatever. Like, give us a PTQ and you'll see Hogak, because people are actually going to try to metagame and win.
Also, just saying, Hogak is pretty bad against False Cure and Swords to Plowshares. That has been relevant in my testing thus far this week. Man, that was so cool. Just like 8 damage to your dome, and I removed the Hogak.
That's juicy.
That Kavu Predator False Cure deck is really fun. I'm not going to call that deck good, but you will randomly make some creatures with 20 plus power that aren't Merit Lodge, and that's a rarity for Legacy.
Strong. So is our closing recommendation going to be False Cure for the metagame?
I mean, for the lulz, False Cure is pretty great. And I actually played the False Cure Mirror when I was recording that video.
Does that make the cure true? Do they cancel out? How does that even... No, I guess they wouldn't. I'm just trying to remember what that card even does. That's an enchantment that if an opponent gains life, they lose it instead?
No, it's an instant. So
okay.
If an opponent would gain... No. Yeah, if an opponent would gain life, instead not instead. They lose twice that much life. So it's not a replacement effect. It's a trigger that happens after they gain the life that burns them for double it.
Gotcha. And I'm gonna have to pull up this card because I think there might be a relevant rules interaction that might surprise you.
While Brian's looking that up, if we're calling this The Cure, I hope that Phil plays out this episode to like Friday I'm in Love or some other terrific Cure song. I'd be a big fan of that.
Okay, so the rules interaction I was thinking of doesn't matter because False Cure just says if they would gain life. But if you compare that to Reign of Gore, which is an enchantment that reads, if a spell or ability would cause its controller to gain life, that player loses that much life instead. which is a completely different thing because lifelink is an ability, but the damage causes the gain of life, not the ability lifelink. So you can attack with impunity with a Batterskull through a rain of gore, and you will still gain 4 life.
The more you know.
Yep. So in case this deck gets bigger and like starts adding more Rain of Gore effects, more false cures to the deck, just remember to get in there with your Batterskull. Go ahead, jam that Uro. Or no, you don't get Uro. You get Batterskull though.
All right. Well, now we've got that sorted out. All right. Any closing thoughts here about the legacy format or anything of that nature?
Yep, I'm just gonna keep working on blue-white rest in peace decks until they work, because it's only a matter of time.
I think I'm gonna go listen to The Cure.
I think I'm gonna go play some Diablo 3.
I'm gonna go to bed.
All right. On that note, thank you all for listening. I hope you have a great rest of the day, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Well, we won't really see you, right? That's not how this works, because it's a podcast, but, like, you get the idea. We'll miss you.